Okay.
Okay.
So, Frans,
Yeah.
you can do
14?
it.
Okay. Well, we're just 14, so I wait a second till exactly 3:30 to start.
No,
Yeah.
I think you can
Oh,
start.
it's there.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, welcome to you. I see we have 14 participants at the moment, but more will come in. So welcome with this webinar, and a special welcome, of course, to our speaker, Salim Fakir. I will introduce him in a second, but first, maybe it's good to to make sure that the webinar will be in English, of course, regarding our guest and lecturer. And please switch off your microphones. If you will raise a question, please use the chat, and we'll have an eye on the chat and see what questions come in. And Richard Wouters, one of the organizers, he will run the chat and put forward your questions before. Well, welcome at this fourth webinar in the series on energy transition Europe-Afrika, an equal and just partnership with a question mark. Well, when you should have a just and equal partnership, I think you should start with a clear picture of the interest and the priorities on both sides. So if you have the energy transition from the Dutch or the European point of view, I think, well, it's quite clear to us, raw materials, hydrogen trade in the future, etc. But we should also have a clear picture of the priorities and the commitments, the challenges at the African side. So therefore, we are very pleased to have a real voice from Africa with Salim Fakir. He's located at the moment in Johannesburg, South Africa, and he's the founder and the director of the African Climate Foundation there. But he has already a very long career in the renewable energy, economics, sustainable development, etc. He has been at the World Wildlife Fund. He has been head of the Policy and Futures unit, for instance. And he collaborated also as an interviewee with the report of the AIV, the International Advisory Board. That was the report we started with in our first webinar. So I think we have an excellent speaker for this afternoon to hear what his ideas are about the energy priorities from Africa regarding, and second, well, if we are talking here about a just and equal partnership, etc. So what does it mean from the African side? So what do you want from the African side if we go along with Europe and Africa in a very equal and just partnership? So Salim, I think floor is to you. We're very pleased if you will tell us something and go into these questions.
I must say first in Dutch, goeiedag.
Good.
Well, not goeienaand yet, but ik bleef in Kapstad. And that's as far as I'll go with the Dutch for now. So don't say anything rude in Dutch, I will understand it. But it's my real pleasure to be here and more see this as a conversation and an understanding of a different world and where I come from. And just to remind everybody that Africa is 54 states, not one country. And what happens in South Africa is very different from what occurs in Egypt or Nigeria. In fact, sometimes we forget that North Africa is part of Africa. But it's very diverse, different languages, over 2,000 languages, different systems, different kinds of political situations. And some countries are rich and many are poor. Most of the poorest countries are actually in Africa. But I would like to say a little bit about the African Climate Foundation, which I established in April 2020. It's only slightly over 4.5 years old. It's a very young foundation. And it's independent. It operates in several countries. And at the moment, we have extensive work in about 10 countries, but we actually are involved in close to 30 or 31 countries in terms of the philanthropic investments we make. So the African Climate Foundation is what in the climate philanthropy space is called a pool fund. So in other words, it receives funding from a number of endowments, maybe one or two in South Africa, but most of them are in the US, Europe, that invest in the programs that are related to climate and development. And so the focus we have is on energy transitions, which is the topic of today, sustainable agriculture and land use, which I know the Dutch are very big on, because you have many fantastic institutions like Wageningen and many others. In fact, my first visit to very interesting projects in West Africa was facilitated by Wageningen University. And I have to thank you for that. And the third area is, of course, a very important area for all of us, even though there might be a little bit more focus on Africa, is the effects of extreme weather that impacts many countries, like heat, cyclones, storms, floods. And the Southern Africa region is a big, quite vulnerable to this. So the underlying philosophy of the African Climate Foundation is to find solutions to two areas. The first is to understand that climate is a risk. It could be a risk like you have many economies that could be suddenly affected by a extreme event like a pandemic, wars, that could be a global war, or financial crisis. And so we must see climate risk as a slow-moving and sometimes also fast-moving effect on the economies of many countries. And it's very evident that those countries that have stronger governments, communities, ability to organize, and have better financial resources are able to withstand these risks better than others. And you find in Africa that is not necessarily the case. And so whatever development investment they've made, there would be a setback. And you have to just look at the impacts of hurricanes in the US. Most recently, we have massive impacts in Alaska, and in Spain, we have Valencia. Just look at all those impacts. And in fact, in the US at the moment, the impact of climate is in the range of 300 billion just in the last year. It is massive. Now you say, well, it's the US, but if you really look at the insurance industry, it's a global industry, with a very few reinsurers having to absorb the impact, the financial losses. And in fact, in many places now in the US, they can't insure any more people who are vulnerable to climate. And I'm sure in Europe you are facing similar situations. And you will have also other challenges, aging population, higher medical bills, and you look in the future, the cumulative impacts of climate risk on European economies, besides the tensions around the war and other effects. These are stresses that economies are having to deal with. Now, put yourself in the place of a country like Malawi. You can see how these kinds of stresses are quite significant because of the scale, the size of those economies. They're very small. But today we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the other side of the equation, which is really, and I don't want to call it mitigation because I don't think the picture of emissions is a big issue in many countries on the continent. It's more relevant for South Africa because we have 90% coal. We have petrochemical industries in Nigeria, Egypt, and so on. So very few countries have, and South Africa is the biggest emissions producer globally. In terms of global emissions, it's one of the top 20. We have some risk in terms of having to transition to cleaner energy if the European carbon border tax adjustment mechanism is put in place. So there are not just climate risk from the weather, but also transition risk from the effects of a new carbon pricing and border taxes that will force countries to having to rectify move from high emissions to lower emissions in order to be economically competitive in the future. But the biggest challenge in Africa is really around electrification. And I think there are a couple of things that have to be brought together in the electrification debate. Of course, it's climate, because Africa is a fast-growing economy and world economy generally, with a quarter of the world's population that will be in Africa, very young people, high levels of urbanization, and there's a need for industrial development, construction. Think of all the amount of steel, cement that is required and the emissions that would be associated with that. So, and then you have lack of energy access. You need to have more digital inclusion. Why is that important? Because it allows for Africans to be integrated better into the regional and global economy. More digitization and electrification allows for that. So the electrification is more than the story about climate. It is the story about development and climate. Because if you solve, and by the way, it's another factor would be the fact that even the availability of electrification on the continent, particularly from renewables, still the highest cost per kilowatt compared to Europe and comparative countries in terms of developing countries in Southeast Asia and so on. So we still have a high cost electricity, and that has an impact on economic growth, household income, and the ability to actually sustain that long-term electrical infrastructure where the income base is low. So there is also a paradox in that without question, Africa has vast energy resources. You just have to calculate the amount of oil, gas, and then hydro, geothermal, and let's not even count the wind and solar resources that are available. Those are significant. So you get the paradox of more energy, wealth, and resources than lots of places on the planet, but you have this massive energy poverty of between 600 to 700 million people without electrification. And even if they were having electrification, like we have in South Africa, the cost of that electrification also has the effect of excluding people from enjoying the availability of that electricity because they can't afford it. So they have to go back to traditional sources like wood, charcoal, and all those things. So this paradox can only be addressed not through just a climate lens, but a new kind of vision for development. So we have to address the problem generally as how do we diversify the economies of Africa that they can sustain levels of reasonable growth, raise the national and household income that enables the long-term electrification infrastructure to be self-sustaining, so that you don't borrow and then you borrow more and more because you have invested in a sunk infrastructure cost, but the levels of income generation in the country or in the region cannot be enough to pay off the cost of the asset or the infrastructure. So that's basically the kind of challenge that the African Climate Foundation has to work with. And what we are doing, which is quite interesting, is that in our work as the African Climate Foundation, because we wear two hats, the climate and development hat, we're trying to work in countries to look at the cheapest way in which we can scale up electrification. It doesn't have to be large-scale grid transmission lines. It could be smaller autonomous generation, microgrids, distributed generation. In many cases, it's possibly in the early phase in some countries, not possible to do high cost and concentrated with a huge capital intensity, centralized utility scale model. So you have to start in a more segmented, incremental, and then gradually scale up as the economies grow and you can sustain the cost of the expansion of the infrastructure. So we have to take a very different mindset, more experimental in the approach of how we do this, because you cannot electrify without simultaneously trying to figure out how to take up the underdevelopment that is going on in the continent. And the underdevelopment is skewed. At present, we have a skewed development trajectory because in many countries, there are lots of big holes being dug for oil, well, minerals exported. Most of the electricity that is provided for is for the mines and surrounding industries, with the general population not having that level of electrification as required. We have a success story in that in South Africa, for the decarbonization of the coal assets, we're going to have to try to decommission them. we've developed as a foundation, worked with the South African government on the Just Energy Transition Partnership, which is a large-scale partnership, energy transition partnership that has raised 8.5 billion as a start from France, Germany, the UK, US, and other bilateral partners, including the European Investment Bank, to kickstart the expansion of the grid, decommissioning of coal plants and with replacing them with cleaner energy. And the third is to bring about reforms in the electricity sector, like unbundling the state utility, that you have a new independent transmission company, to fast track the public enabling support for private sector to take off. I just need to run to put the light on, and I'll be back in 2 seconds. I apologize for this. It's a very funny thing. So I want to give a sense of the situation in South Africa, for example. We have 40,000 megawatts of coal plants. Many of them in the last 5 years were not generating to the full capacity because of lots of problems. So we had a thing that, I don't know if you're familiar, not blackouts, but load shedding. We have power cuts that are regulated. That problem has been solved for now. At least 3-4 coal plants have to be decommissioned, but they've been kept on life support for a while because of a power shortage. 2 coal plants that were built were struggling to get to full capacity because of all kinds of technical problems. But we introduced policy reforms to scale up renewables. So there's a big renewables procurement program through public-private partnerships, and that's around 6,000 to 7,000 megawatts. And then because of the power shortage and emergency need for power, the government removed the constraint and restriction on how much power private households and firms can generate. And as a result of the unblocking of that, in just 1 year, we generated 5,000 megawatts. But remember, it's mostly solar with very lower capacity, even nameplate. 1 megawatt might be by nameplate, but it's actually 20% or so on. And then in other parts of the regions, there are still a lot more work to be done for scaling up renewables. Biggest factor is cost and the cost of capital. Because remember, 90% of a wind generation farm or solar farm is the capital, the upfront capital that you have to put up. That's not necessarily true for gas or coal plants, with a lot of the other costs as fuel and operating costs, etc. I think I would like to then, engage in a discussion with yourself on a set of questions that you sent me. And I think Richard Voter is wanting to do that. And for me, that will be a good way to answer a lot of the outstanding questions. But I just wanted to bring to the table a taste of maybe 3 things I would like to say. The one is that the need for electrification is a material and livelihood necessity. It's not just a climate issue. Number two is that the threshold of clean energy on the continent is still low comparatively, and given the vast resource, wind and solar, geothermal and hydro. Remember, geothermal and hydro allow for balancing of variable power. And the third is that you cannot look at electrification without a broader economic development strategy that is about economic diversification. And four, I think, is that Africa, in order to scale up its electrification and, well, let's call it the just transition, has to foster strategic partnerships, Europe, China, US, in order to get this off the ground. Five is that, I know I said three, but I'll make it five. There are complexities in different countries. And so we have to be clever that we also have to take a more sub-regional approach to scaling up electrification, so that countries that don't have the resources can perhaps, for example, if Botswana has a better balance sheet than Namibia and so on, then Botswana should build overcapacity and export, hopefully cheaper, electricity to neighboring states. And that's the model we should look at as well. So I want to leave it at that, Frans, and then I know we can ask a lot of questions next. Yeah, thank you. Your microphone is off. Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Salim, for this fascinating introduction. Raises a lot of questions, a few of them from participants who posted in the chat. One question is on the cost of upfront capital for renewables. Of course, we understand that it is a significant part of the total costs, but why is it higher in Africa than in other parts of the world? So that's one question. And a follow-up question to that, will the Mission 300 initiative recently announced by the World Bank and the African Development Bank help in providing this much needed capital for the deployment of renewables? Mission 300 means that by 2030, 300 million people in sub-Saharan Africa should be connected to electricity. So it's quite ambitious. Yeah. Then you mentioned CBAM. You use a carbon border adjustment mechanism, which puts a price on the carbon emitted during the production of carbon-intensive goods that are imported in the European Union. To prevent unfair competition between goods produced in the EU and goods abroad, to prevent carbon leakage, factories moving from the EU to places where CO2 emissions are not priced. Yes, of course, this has an impact on African exporters of cement, iron, steel, aluminium, fertilizers, etc. I can remember that as progressives, when this was discussed in the European Parliament, we tried to plow back all the receipts from CBAM to the countries, especially the poorest countries, which would be affected by it. That in the end was not carried. So now we see some pleading for exemptions for the poorest countries in Africa. on CBAM, which of course would threaten the integrity of the whole system. The alternative would be to give more support to poor countries affected by CBAM to decarbonize their industries, for instance, through the already existing just energy transition partnerships, which exist between EU countries and South Africa as well, I think.
Okay.
Can I put more questions, or I have two more?
No, I would say let's first take these three.
Okay.
We can do several rounds. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
the upfront cost, the
I've got it.
Mission 300 and the CBAM.
Yes, I have it.
Yeah.
I think the upfront cost is a much bigger issue than just renewables. It's the general cost of capital on the continent is high, and that's got to do with many factors: the state of the debt to GDP ratio, debt service costs, and you can say that partly it's also got to do with the capacity of the economies to be diversified and not to be commodity dependent, and balance of payment issues and currency issues, and credit rating. So I think there's a lot of work going on the cost of capital issues. There's in fact under the G20. By the way, South Africa is hosting the G20 now, so I am very intimately involved. And I know one of the big issues for the Africa expert panel is to look at the question of the cost of capital. It's one of the biggest priorities for discussion. I don't know if it's easy to solve, and I'm not a financial engineer to know whether that can be solved overnight. But I think in most cases, the more stronger you build the economy, that is export orientated and has a higher I would say spend on human capital and other sources of capital over time with the right growth rates, you can have the power and the positioning to change the nature in which a country's evaluation by credit rating is done. And it's a reflection of the asymmetry of power that exists between let's say big capital, the credit rating agencies, and the perception of risk. And I would say that in some people, experts have told me that perception is often in some countries not founded, and so the weighting of risk is much higher than it should be, and the capital cost of capital should be lower. But a lot more can be done, by the way, also to confront that through better utilization of African savings, more innovative financing solutions using diaspora funds, because there's a lot of diaspora funding that comes in. Thirdly, improving the tax base, tax collection, and finding ways to prevent leakage of flows of capital outside of the continent through illicit or profit shifting. There's a cluster of issues that need to be solved in order to boost confidence and strengthen negotiation of the country, national governments, sovereigns, in how their debt conditions are set and the pricing of that debt. So I think, no simple answer, must have a long view. Many African countries have to cooperate in order to solve that with their providers of capital. The M300 initiative is not a new initiative in the sense of the essence of the issue it's trying to address. It might be a different label. Welcome initiative. It seems more like a supply side solution rather than also demand side. Remember, I told you earlier that you've got to align supply with a rise in growth of income and affordability over time. And that will determine the level of penetration that you can sustain. I think what they can do to improve demand is obviously lower the cost of delivering the energy solution. But again, I have to go and put the light on and I'll be back.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So I think the M300 is going to face the same quandary that I've just described in the first part of the first question. But I think if they have an experimental mindset, appetite for risk, the World Bank and the AFDB, then maybe they can catalyze solutions that were possibly not possible before. On C-band, I think Voto, my sense is that there is going to be a retraction of C-band. There's now a request for for postponement for 2 years. We must not only think of opposition from outside of EU. There's a lot of internal opposition within the EU. And I think the Draghi report on the competitiveness of the EU has now put the cat amongst the pigeon. And we also have the Inflation Reduction Act. We will have to see now what happens in the Trump era, whether these instruments and policies can be implemented, given the heavy aggressive response from the US in terms of trade and climate policies. So my guess is that C-band is going to slow down, and that there are also internal tensions within the EU, and that you had this problem, Dutch, French farmers, opposing any form of environmental taxes. Your energy prices are high. I don't know what's the situation in the Netherlands, but certainly in Germany. And if you look at VW shutting down 2 big plants in Germany, it's never heard of in a country like Germany. So there are bigger issues now converging to come to play that's going to have an impact on the politics of C-band. And Voto, I'm sure you still got your parliamentary friends that might cast a different view on it.
Salim, would C-band be damaging to Africa very much?
Yes, it will be. And in fact, if you look at a country like Mozambique, which shouldn't really be subjected to C-band, its aluminium exports will be heavily impacted.
Mm-hmm.
South Africa doesn't have the capacity to respond to C-band in the short term, maybe in the long term. And some of the solutions that need to be incentivized, like green hydrogen, they're at a level of cost now that it's not feasible to switch steel to green hydrogen, or even for that matter, cement and so on. So, or the petrochemicals industry. So it will have a massive impact. We commissioned with David Luke at the LSE Feroz Lahji center there a study, and it showed definite impacts on exports, and it's understandable. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Walter, you want to ask further questions?
Yeah. Richard.
Yes.
Are there any more questions?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned green hydrogen. Still very expensive. You're right. Perhaps I should explain, it's hydrogen produced not from natural gas, but from renewable energy and water. The water molecule is split in electrolyzers, thus producing hydrogen and oxygen. And the hydrogen could be used, for instance, in industries that need high temperatures for their production, like steel production, for instance. There are initiatives in Europe to acquire green hydrogen from Africa to build solar and wind farms and electrolyzers in Africa. In the previous webinar, we focused on Namibia, for instance. And of course, the question is, how do we prevent new forms of extractivism, neocolonialism? So we talked about the importance of local benefits, providing renewable energy, not just to the electrolyzers, which produce the hydrogen, which is then to be exported to Europe, but part of the energy should go to local communities. Same goes for clean water. But then there's the bigger question how this could drive industrialization in Africa. How can we promote more value addition in Africa? If you're serious about green industrialization in Africa, instead of shipping hydrogen from Africa to Europe, which also has quite a large carbon footprint, by the way, couldn't we work towards producing e-fuels for aviation and shipping, or green fertilizers in Africa itself? What would that take, in your view, Salim?
Yeah.
Perhaps you can first answer this, and then I have one more question.
Sure, yeah. You want to ask one or two questions? For sure, yeah.
The second one is perhaps more provocative. It's more about geopolitics. We have Trump now in the White House. His policies could well come down to America first, Africa last. He has shown little interest in Africa in his first term. This time he might not be willing to extend the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which provides easier access for African products to the US market. He might put extra tariffs on imports from Africa. Of course, he's pulling the US out of the Paris Climate Agreement, out of the World Health Organization. He has halted all foreign aid, which all has a disproportionate impact on Africa, both in the short and in the long run. And yeah, when we see how cruel far-right autocrats turn against their own people and towards the rest of the world, I would say that it's time for Democrats to unite worldwide. We're facing three big autocracies now: China, Russia, and the US. And this brings me to the role of China in Africa.
Okay.
And of course, it raises questions in Europe. We cannot be cheering when autocratic China exports its values to Africa through the Belt and Road Initiative, for instance. And we're wondering how Europe can do better than China in Africa, in a way that supports Africans who care about democracy and human rights. And perhaps I have to add as well that we are not in no place to lecture Africa on democracy, given our colonial past and current neo-colonial practices. But I would still like to ask a question to you, especially since I think you have been to China as well.
Richard, thank you. Two very challenging questions. Hydrogen, how can we come from extractivism to more green industrialization of Africa and local development? So what's your vision on that, Salim?
So look, we have been working and supporting some of the work in Namibia. I think it's challenging. I think the Namibians have been trying to take a more enlightened view in terms of not just supporting hydrogen for exports, but also trying to look at green industries. But Namibia, for people who don't know, is a very small country. I mean, a very large country with a very small population, 2 million. It's definitely bigger than the Netherlands. But a beautiful country with some of the best wind resources, probably in the southern hemisphere after Chile or countries such as those. But I have not seen one single deal pulled off outside of Europe on green hydrogen. So that's an interesting question. There's some in Egypt, of course, but the proximity of Egypt to Rotterdam Harbor is like not that very far. I have possibly three positions on green hydrogen. The first is that if you don't have the way to pay for the premium cost, which is a subsidy, which is going to be even more difficult now, given the political environment that is confronting the European Union and also Germany, which is possibly the biggest buyer of green hydrogen. Those subsidies will not look very palatable to the current situation. Let's see what happens in the January elections. Well, when is it, by the way? It's very soon, I think. Or no, yeah, it's very soon.
Yeah.
It's February, right?
Yeah.
It's February. So you've got to overcome the premium hurdle. The second part is it feasible to have green hydrogen? This is a big question for all of us. If you don't totally ban hydrogen from natural or fossil fuel-based natural gas, and that can easily compete in the market because you possibly could not differentiate between green produced hydrogen versus gray and blue, whatever you want to call it. All different colors, by the way. For audience who don't know about, there's turquoise, there's blue, there's green, and there's white hydrogen. The other day I was hearing about white hydrogen. And thirdly, it doesn't seem economic for me because, first of all, you need a lot of energy. First, you've got to need a lot of energy to do the electrolysis. Then you have to use a lot of energy to store it, compress it in a storage facility, or mix it with, make it into ammonia, and then an ammonia has to be shipped, regasified. I mean, the energy invested versus the energy return is a little bit more complicated. So, for example, if you study the work of the Oxford Energy Institute, they've done a lot of work on green hydrogen. And by the way, if you look at the hydrogen molecule, it's very light, needs to be liquefied. And if you took a liter of oil versus let's say, for argument's sake, as a comparison, a liter of liquefied hydrogen, the cost of actually doing that and the volume and density of what you have in terms of hydrogen versus liquefied oil, which is from oil wells, is much lower cost, and also in terms of the energy return. So there are some physical, chemical issues confronting besides financial, confronting the issue of hydrogen. Sorry, I just got to run. And so my intuitive sense is that green hydrogen, has been pushed because of the Green Deal. There was a lot of excitement, but now we find that the reality is dawning. That actually to make the economics work is a lot more difficult, especially in more and more distant places from where it is needed. So the question I think maybe the Germans might face is it not better to relocate their industries to Namibia rather than the other way? But you know that politically that's not going to be feasible. On the question of the US, I think the current trends are basically, break down everything and create a new order. And we don't know yet on AGOA whether they will go ahead. Depends on how the US views its relationship in Africa. And if there's some level of competition with China, then maybe there's a chance that AGOA will survive. Because it will be seen that if you remove AGOA, that it's a double-edged sword, because sometimes AGOA is also a entry for Chinese exports via Africa. Yeah, and I think the US may ask more difficult questions if they were to push AGOA ahead. In general, there's been pushback from the Republicans. Before even Trump came on board, then some sense prevailed. Now we don't know whether sense will prevail. Thirdly, on China, I think China is recalibrating and intensifying its relationship with Africa. It's trying to move from what I would say was what generally has been described as the Angola model. You provide a loan, and in return you pay for the loan through a resource extraction model. But I think China is now, from the engagements we have with China, they are actually looking to shift based on the last forum for China-Africa meeting. And for those who don't know, China has a political platform in which the 54 states meet every 2 years with China at the highest level, heads of state, or what is called the Forum for China and Africa, to discuss the China-Africa partnership. And usually it ends with a commitment by China for, in this case, $60 billion towards supporting initiatives on the range of issues, including, in this case, a lot more focus on climate as well. Now, it happens to be that China is the dominant technology producer in solar PV, wind, electric vehicles, has command over most of the critical minerals in the world, and can do it, including electric vehicles, can do it at much cheaper cost. And so for Africa, it's not so much about whether we like China or not, but whether the partnership makes sense given the economic needs of the continent. And I always say to my European colleagues and the US, why don't you beat China with a better deal? Then you will have an audience in that.
So in that respect, Salim, how do you view the European Union the things? So we kicked out of a number of countries because of our history, but how do you view the disadvantages and the advantages of Europe in the competition?
I think that we mustn't just read the media, but we must also look at what's happening on the ground. The European, the EU is made of 27 members, if I'm correct. Each have individual relationships with Africa with varying degrees of cooperation and maybe harmony and maybe a little bit of disharmony. I don't need to mention the countries. One of them is with the F, yeah, which is being booted out of many countries at the moment. From where I sit, because I deal with many, that I talk to the French, I talk to the Germans, I talk to not the British, they're out of we have Brexit, so they're out. But many European countries, the Italian, Spanish, the nature of the relationship varies. That is very different from the way the EU as a bloc deals, and I think there sometimes at this juncture between in fact the Dutch as well. Dutch has a very good relation with South Africa, for instance, historical, despite colonial history. The Germans as well. French are not that strong, but they're growing. Belgium also has a very strong relationship with South Africa. But at the EU level, I think there's a kind of bureaucratic inertia that is not allowing Europe to be innovative and creative. Well, one within Europe itself, because the Draghi report says that. On the other, it is also, I would say, not perhaps as strategic as it should be with the continent. And we see that now with, for example, I am on the Paris Peace Forum for Critical Minerals. It was fascinating to listen to the discussions during the Minerals Week as to the challenges that the Europeans are facing. And it boils down to three things. Corporations are not willing to take a risk in Africa because the Europeans are not providing the risk mitigation, political and insurance risk. Number two is that there are supply chain conditions that are coming from the EU in terms of ESG and many other things that is creating an onerous compliance regime for European companies that want to raise funds in the EU, that they have to comply with those rules. And thirdly, I think the Europeans are in a panic because of the fact that the Chinese have managed to secure graphite, lithium, cobalt, etc. And now you find other players coming, the US, the Saudis, and so on. Let's not forget the Saudis and the UAE are scaling up their investments in this. So there's immense competition. And I think the EU has to have a paradigm shift and a model of engagement that almost they have to almost create a special agency that can escape all the bureaucratic logjam to deal. That would be my innovation I would introduce.
Yeah.
I don't know how easy that was going to be. It's going to take time. And remember, the mining side, they go through boom and bust cycles. If the price is not right, then the incentive to invest in a new mine that takes 10 to 15 years is quite a tall order for corporations that their shareholders are also pressuring them to lower costs, make more profits, and try to maximize the sort of payback period as short as possible. These are challenges that I think it's not just the bureaucracy, but also the nature of the industry. Right?
So at the start of your talk, Salim, you made clear that one of the priorities of Africa, it's not only on climate, but it's also on energy poverty and energy access. So that's one of the biggest problems you have to solve. That should be about underdevelopment. So should you combine, if you talk equal partnership, for instance, should you talk about a combination of, well, we need, for instance, the raw materials or critical minerals, etc. So you help us this way, and we help you to solve anyhow the energy access thing. So a broad agenda of all these things, should that help in the relationship between Europe and Africa?
Yes, I think that both sides have to think out of the box, and in fact, the African Climate Foundation has taken up the importance of the critical minerals arena. And we are now doing a number of consultations because we have, in fact, in South Africa, the annual mining week. There's a lot of players we're going to meet. One of the things we are looking at two things. The one is the idea of setting up a critical mineral support facility and have participation possibly from Gulf states, the EU and others, in that facility to look at a new development agenda for critical minerals around better beneficiation, which is the nature of your topic here also today. These things are not short-term, they take long. And at the same time, there's urgency for resource security and supply, which has to be solved. The second part is that we just launched today a Green Industries Expert Panel to support governments to look at how to connect resource with green industrial development. Again, none of these things are short-term. It's not buying a piece of chocolate, but you have to develop industrial capability. Is a long process. You have to have the right human capital. You have to build an R&D ecosystem. You've got to find good firms that will bring the capability and technology in the early phase that can partner, and you have to have firms in Africa that are able to partner with other global firms because they have the knowledge and understanding of the supply chain and also knowledge of the markets and also the capital. They can raise the capital at cheaper cost on the basis of their corporate balance sheet. Okay.
Yeah.
Because sometimes a big company like Siemens or Maersk or Philips, a Dutch company, they have better credit ratings than sometimes the governments in Africa. Only issue is, of course, the exchange rate issue. If you want to repatriate your capital, this is one of the reasons that France keeps the West African franc, the Central African franc, tied to the Paris Treasury, so their firms don't lose, because of currency issues.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Any more questions to your side?
Yeah, just to follow up on what you said on your work on critical minerals. If I understand you well, the aim is indeed to have more value addition in Africa.
That's
not
a very
just,
good summary.
Yeah,
Yes.
not just mine and refine
That's right.
the minerals, but have factories for battery precursors, batteries, or even electric vehicles in Africa.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it's doable in some countries, by the way. South Africa, it's doable. Morocco. Sorry, I just have to do the right thing. But you guys can have a good laugh at this one. I think I need a button in the boardroom that I can press. Like this situation. Where was I? I'm just trying to think.
Richard, please repeat.
Yeah. The value addition in the field of critical minerals.
Yes. So certain countries can be flagship countries, and we also have to look at the model of some countries playing a bigger role in the space. They become the sort of the beacons, economic beacons for Africa, and then other countries can learn from that. And I think, that's probably a way to think about of how to do that. And that's probably how Europe also developed. You had some countries leading the industrial development, and others followed and learned from those who have led. And I think that is possible on the continent. In fact, Morocco did that very well, actually. It learned from Europe. Ethiopia is actually trying to do that. And Kenya and Tanzania are looking to diversify the economies. And just, out of curiosity, when I studied the economic effects of COVID, those countries that were highly dependent on minerals and oils were impacted the most from an economic point of view. Those countries that, like Kenya and others, were more diversified because they don't, like Kenya and Rwanda, don't really have mineral wealth. They did better in dealing with COVID, except, Kenya is now going through a debt crisis. Yeah.
Richard,
Perhaps
any more discussions from the chat?
There was lots of references to earlier discussions on hydrogen. Just had one follow-up question about the critical minerals and the local value issues. I have seen plans from, I think, the African Development Bank to build factories to make battery precursors in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
That's related to the Mining Strategic Partnership, MSP, of the US. But to be honest, nothing is taken off the ground.
Okay. Yeah. So we really should look to more advanced countries, more stable countries like South Africa and Morocco.
South Africa, and Morocco, and places like that.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe Salim, big focusing at the answer. So what we are willing to come up at the end of the webinar series is to our politicians in Holland and in European Parliament, etc. So what to do if you want to make a real equal partnership with Africa? So what should we do? If you should come up with a statement on that.
Sure. No.
What is the first thing?
I think we need to take stock of what that relationship looks like now. Is it healthy? Is it not healthy? Can it be made healthy? What needs to be done? How do we build trust? That's a crucial issue. And then I think there must be an honest conversation on how to reinvent or revitalize a relationship in a different way. I've actually written about this. You could find it on the website. And in fact, ACF is one of the founders of the Africa-Europe Foundation with Friends of Europe and so on, where we have a way of trying to encourage conversation between the two continents. So I think, and then we must pick one or two things that we can work on together. And I think electric infrastructure and finding ways to support that. We do that already with the Lobito corridor, which is a real, I'm surprised we can't do that with electrification. Obviously, there are challenges, and we know that.
You mean also the autonomous kind of systems?
Yes.
Or
right.
you mentioned more the grid connected.
Yes, but both. You need to look at different
options
because different countries will have different solutions. There's also regional power pools to make them work better. For example, East Africa, is probably 90% clean already.
Yeah.
We just have to connect, to have connector grid solutions that we have to invest in. So yeah, I think China is doing that in a very systematic way. They're looking at a master plan for energy development on the continent. It's sitting at the level of the AU. I need to get an update from my team as to where that is, and putting some resources to that.
Yeah.
So
you were heading to 2 points. The one is the infrastructure. Your second?
I think there's a lot to do in agriculture as well. And agriculture is key to the development, particularly small-scale agribusiness, agri-industrial development, and to invest in that. At the moment, the Africa-Europe partnership is very focused on sort of the interests of Europeans, which is issues around immigration, security, etc. I would say that there needs to be a little bit more about investment partnerships. How do we help to create the right investment flow into Africa, help them to lower the capital cost? There are lots of solutions, particularly the availability of special drawing rights from the IMF. Just yesterday, I heard Ethiopia received its special drawing right allocation, which allows Ethiopia to then utilize the SDRs to strengthen its fiscus, its government budget and so on, in order to do more for its economy. So I think my sense is, and I'm not necessarily an expert on Africa-Europe relations, but from my conversations with many people, I don't think there is a very long-term strategic kind of vision from both sides.
Yeah.
In fact, my chair of my board has written a book on this, which his name is Carlos Lopez, which is really a useful book to read because he was one of the lead negotiators for the Africa-Europe partnership, just the last one. And it will,
you mentioned the word a honest conversation. So
yes, but we have to
honest conversation between Europe and Africa missing?
I think so. I think that, as I said, that sometimes at the EU level, there's a different conversation from what the diplomats in the national level undertake. And so, you can have private conversations. I've been in one of those private conversations with ambassadors of Spain, and they say very different things from the EU commissioners. So those are questions you have to address. Those are not, my ones. But so I do think that we have to go beyond conversation, but the conversation is necessary. We have to take stock of what the EU partnership, what has worked, has not worked. And what does a new deal for Africa, between Africa and Europe, look like going forward?
New deal. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Richard, just a last chance. Are there any more comments? Do you have any more questions?
If we can go another 5 minutes, if you don't mind, I have to rush off.
Okay, that's okay. I think we are about finishing.
No recent questions. No recent questions in the chat. No, I think Salim has really underlined the need for a more long-term strategic engagement between Europe and Africa, and thinking about the concept of equal partnerships, which is so often mentioned in European and Dutch documents. I think we should understand that it is not about being less, how do you say that? It's not about asking fewer questions, difficult questions, but asking more difficult questions to each other. Equal partnership means that you have to tackle all the difficult questions between the partners without taboos. And yeah, I think this webinar showed that as
Maybe
well.
we need to play
Okay.
more sport together.
Yeah. Okay, so Salim, I think we had a really nice discussion.
Yes, I enjoyed it.
And
Yeah.
well, it's a bit a contribution to a better understanding, etc. Thank you very much. We
No, it's my
will
pleasure.
continue with our webinars. Well, I hope we can be in touch later on things. So
You're very welcome, and I appreciate the invitation and I would say collegial way in which we had a conversation. So, yes, we'll never forget Europe is only 13 kilometers away from Africa, or Africa from Europe. We are neighbors.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So thank you very much indeed, and thank you for all the participants.
Thank you very much. We say
we had about 30, I think. To the participants, well, we will have the next webinar. It's more on raw materials and the battery paradox. So we go into the raw materials discussion on February 11. So it's about 2 weeks. So same time. So please join us then, and the report of this session will be published also on the website. I think we come to an end. So thank you all. Enjoy your day. All the best with your activities of
no
the
problem.
foundation in Africa. And we hope we'll meet.
Whenever you're in Cape Town, any of you, please.
Thank you. Thank you for this invitation. It's will be a reason to come over to there.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Zo. Nu zijn we geloof ik met z'n drieën.
Ja, kunnen we nog even evalueren. Ik vond het wel interessant.
Titia, zet ze even aan.
Ja.
Hoeveel mensen hadden we op zijn hoogst online? Want ik zag maar iets van
24.
24, nou dat is een stuk lager.
Ja, het viel een beetje... Ja.
Misschien het Engels. Want het was...
de vorige keren was het toch meer.
Ja.
Toen waren het dan in de 60 of zo, of 70. Ja.
Het was hartstikke interessant, moet ik zeggen. Ja. En hij spoke ook loud and clear, zeg maar.
Hij was ontzettend goed te volgen. Dat heb je vaker als het niet een eigen taal is.
Ja, precies. Afrikaans-Engels, dat kan ook heel anders zijn.
Ja.
Een heleboel punten zijn de revue ook gepasseerd.
Ja, ook over die waterstof was die nogal helder, hè?
Ja, daar gelooft hij dus niet zo in.
Nee, helemaal niet.
Om maar zacht te zeggen.
Nee, goed, ik weet niet of hij in beeld heeft welke wetgeving er al is in Europa, zichtbaar. Die toch wel tot voortdurende belangstelling voor groene waterstof uit Afrika leidt, zeg maar. Zoals het is een verplichting voor de Europese industrie om in 2030 40% groene waterstof te gebruiken. Er zijn schema's waarmee het kostenverschil, zeg maar, tussen geïmporteerde groene waterstof en grijze waterstof en aardgas wordt overbrugd, et cetera. Het zou kunnen hoor dat deadlines worden uitgesteld, maar het gaat niet meteen verdwijnen, zeg maar, dat kader. Dus daarmee is groene waterstof, ja, het staat nog op de agenda, maar groene waterstof uit Afrika. Maar het is waar, er zitten veel onzekerheden aan, wat het ook moeilijker maakt voor landen om daar op te rekenen.
John, wat vond jij ervan?
John, zet je...
John
hij staat aan, maar...
heb je een microfoon?
Hij heeft een microfoon en heeft hem aanstaan, maar we horen hem niet. Nee.
We horen je niet.
Nee.
En nu? Nee?
Ja, nu wel.
Ja.
Nu wel of nu niet?
Ja, jawel.
Ja, ik zit gewoon als een dode hard te typen. En dan later dan lees ik het nog eens na.
Kon je het een beetje volgen?
Jawel. Nee. Jij hebt, Richard, je vroeg ook nog over de CBAM. Daar begon hij van te zeggen dat het allemaal uitgesteld zou worden en zo.
Ja, dat is maar de vraag hoor.
Ja, dat is ook maar de vraag. Dat wil ik nou gaan uitzoeken. Er is natuurlijk gisteren weer een heel ontregelingsprogramma voor de EU gepubliceerd. Ik heb het gisteren even doorgekeken, maar het punt is natuurlijk, het is alleen maar een aankondiging van grote werkterreinen. En bijvoorbeeld volgende maand komt er dan een rapport, wordt er dan een lijst gemaakt van allerlei richtlijnen die ze gaan aanpakken en zo. Ik heb daar CBAM nog niet meteen bij zien staan. Volgens mij stond het er, het stond er volgens mij wel in, maar meer in een bevestigende moed van dat het gaat gebeuren. Dan zal ik er zo op nakijken.
Hey, over CBAM, John, nog even. Jij schreef me laatst volgens mij dat er studies zijn die aangeven dat de invloed op Afrika zeer beperkt is. En
dat is zijn studie.
Daarom vroeg ik het hem even terug en hij zei van nee, maar dat is wel een ontzettend belangrijke invloed.
Ja, maar het is twee dingen. Het heeft een hele kleine invloed op het bruto nationaal product van de Afrikaanse landen, maar een hele grote invloed op hele specifieke. Hij benoemde aluminium bijvoorbeeld.
Precies. Ja.
Dus dat is dus grote en kleine invloed.
Ja,
maar op de totale economie schrijven ze dan dat heel erg beperkt blijft.
Begrijp het.
Ja, en kijk, er is natuurlijk ook vanuit de Europese industrie, juist vanwege overwegingen van oneerlijke concurrentie, nog steeds druk om door te gaan met CBAM. Het is er niet gekomen alleen op verzoek van milieuactivisten, zeg maar. Er was ook vanuit de industrie een vraag naar. Het is altijd mogelijk dat bij een escalerend handelsconflict tussen de EU en de VS, zeg maar, dat CBAM sneuvelt. Dat is waar.
Ja, dat wel. Dat wel, ja.
Ja, maar Amerika wil dat zelf toch ook? Trump die zwaait toch voortdurend met invoerrechten. Dus, alleen dan is het handje drukken, bedoel je. Van, als Europa dat ook doet, van wie wint. In zo'n soort wereld
leeft we nu.
Maar ik was het wel eens met John dat we niet te makkelijk voor uitzonderingen op CBAM moeten gaan pleiten. Wel voor steun voor landen zoals Mozambique die erdoor geraakt.
Hey, die suggestie die Danielle Hirsch deed, die zei van alles draait in Den Haag over Draghi en nu dat Europese competitiveness, wat was nou, een mooie titel hebben ze. Zou het niet goed zijn om daar ook nog een webinar over te maken? Dat we helemaal de politiek ingaan. Richard, jij begon al te zeggen van, als Salim niet opduikt, dan heb ik zo wat op de plank liggen. Dus ik kan me voorstellen dat jij zo een van de sprekers in zoiets zou kunnen zijn.
Ja, ik wil weer co-referent zijn. Ik denk dat we een externe spreker zouden moeten Nou, ik vond het wel een goed idee.
Ja. En met name zegt ze dan van, ja, niet gewoon overdragen, maar je moet kijken van, oké, wat zijn dan de dilemma's met, bijvoorbeeld waar we het nu over hebben, hè? Zeg maar even, die Afrika-strategie met zijn equal and just partnerships. Nou, dat is een hele andere beleidslijn, daar zit frictie tussen. Nou, en wat leveren onze webinars nou op die fricties, die dilemma's die er zijn? En, ik weet niet of iemand van jullie die dilemma's ook heel helder in beeld heeft al. Ik ben zelf links en rechts wat aan het lezen erover. Van wat de dilemma's zijn. Maar als iemand van jullie daar beter in zit, dan gaan we botje bij botje leggen. Dan gaan we daar een mooi webinar van maken.
Ja, nou goed, je zou kunnen zeggen, het dilemma zit tussen geo-economie en geopolitiek.
Ja.
Geo-economisch bekeken, in het tijdperk waarbij alle asymmetrische afhankelijkheden, zeg maar, gebruikt kunnen worden voor chantage, is het verstandig om meer essentiële goederen zelf te produceren. Meer essentiële grondstoffen zelf te delven, meer technologie zelf te ontwikkelen, et cetera. Maar dat gaat voorbij aan een bredere geopolitieke context, waarin, zoals ik al zei, de autocratie oprukt. Europa dringend behoefte heeft aan meer partners, de resterende democratische landen, maar ook min of meer democratische landen in het mondiale zuiden. En die vragen juist om eerlijker handelsverhoudingen, waarbij ze niet alleen de grondstoffen leveren, maar ook een deel van de industriële producten. Dan is dus de vraag, moeten we zoveel mogelijk zelf produceren, of kunnen we ook de geopolitieke risico's verminderen door te diversificeren? Door wel minder afhankelijk te worden van China, maar niet moeilijk te doen of zelfs toe te juichen dat een deel van onze grondstoffen uit Zuid-Afrika en Brazilië komt.
Ja, maar qua grondstoffen betreft, Nederland heeft bijna niks. En Europa
nee, maar Europa natuurlijk wel. Europa is wel bezig met...
Nou, dan hebben ze het over lithium en zo. En dan, ja, als alles lukt, dan hebben ze een kwart van de benodigde grondstoffen binnen Europa. Het is wel op te krikken van bijna niks naar iets meer. Maar zelfvoorzienend, dat geloof ik niet.
Nee, maar kijk, juist daarom.
Je kan misschien ook bekijken waar we het over hadden, dat Mission 300 initiatief. Hè? Daar zeggen dus de Wereldbank en de Afrikaanse Ontwikkelingsbank, die gaan er veel meer geld in stoppen en die laten landen ook plannen maken. Dus daar geldt geld naar de ontwikkeling van Afrika wat betreft de energy, energy shortage, energy access. Ik weet niet, is Trump al uit de Wereldbank gestapt of niet? Maar, dat is dus ook dat is de ene beweging en het Trump-beleid is de andere beweging, om het maar zo te zeggen. Nou, daar heb je een heel groot dilemma al op. Want de wereld is dus nog wel steeds groter dan alleen maar de Trump-politiek.
Ja.
Ja,
maar dit zijn wel vragen die een beetje boven de milieugroepen van GroenLinks en PvdA uitgaan. Want die zijn, ik bedoel, ik heb erg last van Trump blues en ik ben erg bang dat die mensen om hem heen de zaak zo gaan ombouwen dat het over 4 jaar met de verkiezingen niet meer goed komt.
Zeker. Ja. Maar ik ben er juist voor om de banden tussen de milieubeweging, de milieunetwerkers binnen GroenLinks en PvdA, zeg maar, en de meer geopolitieke denkers te verstevigen. In een tijd waarin die twee beleidsterreinen steeds meer overvloeien.
Ja, maar ik hoor John ook zeggen van, kijk, als we het over een volgend webinar hebben, dan moet je niet helemaal de geopolitiek in, maar wij zijn bezig met een webinar over Europa-Afrika, samenwerken. En dan zou je de geopolitiek en Draghi en zo kan je er wel bij halen, maar dan moet dat wel vertaald zijn in van wat betekent dat nou?
Zeker.
Het hebt over een equal partnership.
Maar bestaat er eigenlijk binnen GroenLinks, want ja, bestaat er binnen GroenLinks PvdA eigenlijk iets soortgelijks rond EU-beleid? Een soortgelijk werkgroep
GroenLinks,
of discussieplatform?
GroenLinks is een netwerk internationale betrekkingen en een Europa-werkgroep, waarbij de laatste volgens mij niet echt meer
Die doen niet meer zoveel, geloof ik.
Nee, maar Partij van de Arbeid heeft wel actieve groepen, in ieder geval op buitenland.
Die heeft in ieder geval een buitenland ding. Die Ties Huis, die is voorzitter van...
Nee, hij is internationaal
secretaris. Ja, dat is iets anders. Okay.
Ties Huis in het veld.
Oké. Kan je er wat van maken, John? Verslagje?
Ik denk het wel, ja. Ik ben bijna klaar met het vorige. Ja, het gaat nu wel heel snel. Elke week een webinar.
Ja. Het gaat heel snel. Maar dan staan we ook leeg. En we hadden dus staan van in maart een slotwebinar.
Ja.
Nu komt dit idee ertussendoor van of een webinar over zo'n onderwerp. Dus dat zouden we de komende weken wel dan invulling moeten geven. Ja. En ik denk dat 12 maart wat vroeg is, maar dat moeten we zien. En we zijn, John, ook contact aan het leggen naar het partijcongres. Dat schijnt op 21 juni te zijn. Om te kijken van, kan je je voorstellen dat we daar een side-event live doen met verschillende mensen. En ik heb de afgelopen dagen net contact met Mohamed Sharim gekregen voor Europarlement. Ja. Dus die zal ook even gaan reageren nu op mijn vraag van kunnen we met jou ook eens een keer praten over dit soort aspecten. Dus dan informeer ik jullie in ieder geval wel erover als dat nog een afspraakje komt. Ja?
Oké.
Ja, hij zou eventueel kunnen spreken over het Draghi-rapport.
Ja, dat lijkt me. Dan zou je er een Draghi's webinar tussen kunnen voegen.
Ja. En dan zou iemand, bijvoorbeeld Marius Troost, die ook een GroenLinkser.
Marius heb ik het gevraagd. En even kijken hoor, ik zit even te bladeren. Je hebt ook ik ken ook iemand, zo'n instituut in Maastricht.
Ja,
het ECDPM.
Ja.
Een soort Europa-instituut is dat,
Die ook wel allerlei dingen rond milieu. Ik zag net een heel stuk van zo over waterstof ook daar geschreven. Dus ik kan me voorstellen dat iemand uit die hoek er ook wat verstandigs over kan zeggen. Ken jij daar mensen, Richard? Ik heb een Alfonso Medinilla.
Nee.
Heb ik wel een keer ontmoet.
Ken ik niet. Ik lees wel stukken van hem, ik kan even geen naam.
Ja, precies.
Ik ken ze van 10 jaar geleden ongeveer.
Ik moet gaan, mensen.
Wordt vervolgd, ja. Ik ook. Hey, bedankt.
Doei.
Oké, prettige avond. Joe.